Good evening, everybody. I'd like to wish you a very warm welcome and thank you for joining us this evening for our annual members' meeting. Like last year, obviously, we're having to hold this meeting virtually via Teams because of the importance of infection prevention control in our hospitals. We would normally be wearing masks, actually, but because we've got sufficient social distancing on the panel here, we're able not to have to wear masks, I think, which will probably help in terms of us being able to communicate more clearly with you. After the presentations, there'll be an opportunity for question and answers. We've had some questions already submitted, so we will take those first. But I would encourage you to write any questions that arise or you've got in your mind in the chat room, and we'll do our very best to deal with them this evening. Before moving on to the formal presentations, I really want to thank all of you, our supporters and local communities, for your continued support for St George's over this last really difficult year. The pandemic, of course, has been challenging. We've run out of adjectives to say how challenging it's been. But I do want to emphasise that the support of members, patients, families, communities have really made a big difference and is hugely appreciated by the board and all our staff. We're going to start by formally agreeing the minutes from last year's annual members' meeting. So anyone with any comments needs to make them known very quickly. Otherwise, if I've got no signal that there's anything in the chat room, I'm going to ask that we accept those. If anyone does have any problems, we can sort that out after the meeting. So now we're going to move on to our patient story. This year, the story is that of Randika and Paul, who some of you may have seen featured in our Channel 4 documentary, Baby Surgeons, which was filmed at St George's. The documentary followed parents in our fetal medicine unit, showing the care that couples like Randika and Paul receive from our wonderful teams. We recently met up with them again to get an update, not only on how they're doing, but just as much how their baby Emily is doing. So I think we're going to have a video now. Let's hope that all the technology works and we see this lovely story. Thank you.
Okay, so for anyone who didn't see Baby Surgeons, can you tell me a little bit about your story?
We had been trying to get pregnant, have a child for about 5 years. Had 3 miscarriages, and then finally got pregnant with our eventual daughter Emily. And the documentary was kind of about how we find out that Emily has achondroplasia, the same condition as us, and we just kind of talk through our feelings and stuff like that.
So why were you guys interested in taking part in Baby Surgeons?
For me, when I was a kid, a lot of people said that I can't have a child because I had a difference. So it was more, I think I had it in my mind. I just wanted to show everybody that this can happen. Of course, in this country, it's very different to when I come from Sri Lanka. So it was more, for me, it was just to show the advances. And also through that came our experience with the miscarriages. As Paul said, we have tried for 5 years, and within that we had 3 miscarriages. It's just to talk through that and also to give hope to those moms out there that it will happen, it can happen.
So since Baby Surgeons aired, what's the reaction been like from your family and friends?
I think it's all been quite positive reaction from the documentary. They all really liked it. It also highlighted, I think, to some of our friends who we didn't necessarily say out loud that, you know, we'd had troubles getting pregnant, and opened up that discussion. And once again, you kind of found out that quite a lot of our friends had also had problems and not discussed about it. So
Yes.
yeah, it was quite nice in that way.
Yeah. What brought us closer, I think there were 2. Then they're not that close friends of mine, but they just messaged me and just said, sorry to hear that you've gone through it. I've gone through too. And then we had this, whole discussion about how we felt at that time. So it opened up, isn't it? It opened up a big conversation around it.
And how were the staff during that time at St George's?
They're brilliant. We actually love St George's, and we still keep in touch with them. I think they put us at ease. It was our first pregnancy, and for us, we have had 3 miscarriages. So we had that. We were going on a roller coaster ride. Then they understood that. So they were very kind, very patient with us. Knowing they know me, I have so many questions all the time. They were able to answer it very carefully, and that's truly really helped us. I've never found any place where they said, truly said, okay, let's go and look at the rooms. Let's see how we can adapt according to you. That felt so nice. That just that little part just felt like, oh, they care about us.
If you could sum up St George's staff in one word, what would you pick?
I can't do one word. Kind. For me.
So St George's staff are kind.
Yeah. They were able to understand me, and they were able to find what I need, and I felt they were very kind of acknowledging all the needs that I had and all the emotions that I'm going through, and they were able to adapt the style that they had and responded to me. So I felt they were kind in that way.
So how is Emily doing now?
Emily is doing great now. She's 16 months, babbling away, talks pretty much constantly, non-stop, definitely has her own mind, knows exactly what she wants, and she will get it.
Very friendly, should I say that?
Yeah, she's very friendly.
Very friendly. When she sees somebody, she will stay with you, but she really wants to communicate with that person. So, very friendly, but as Paul said, has her own mind.
Take that from mother.
All the bad things are mine, isn't it? The friendliness is yours?
Yes.
And when she's a little bit older, do you think you're going to show her episode of Baby Surgeons?
At the wedding.
That's part of my dad's speech.
Dad's speech! Imagine.
Thank you so much to Randika and Paul for recording that film for us. And a big thank you as well, and well done to our teams involved in Baby Surgeons. Now I'd like to hand over to Jacqueline Tosadell, our Chief Executive, who'll be providing an overview of the year, as well as introducing our staff story. Jacqueline.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So, good evening, everybody. My name is Jacqueline Tosadell, and I'm the very, very proud Chief Executive here at St George's. This last year has been like no other. We've had a very phenomenal case of COVID with a phenomenal groups of staff who have managed through a very difficult year. But through that, there's been a lot of positive things that I hope to highlight, as well as how we've actually dealt with the COVID epidemic. St George's has over 9,000 staff. We have just over 1,000 beds and have 5,000 babies delivered in our maternity unit every year. We not only cover South West London, but also areas of Surrey, Kent and Sussex, looking after appropriately 3.4 million people. We've also, over this last year, had a great support from our charity, who have raised over £1 million to help support and look after the wellbeing of our staff, including hubs, garden spaces, arts and music, as well as providing care bags for our staff. I have to say to St George's Charity, thank you so much for your support. I, the board and our staff, so much appreciate that. One of the stories we want to talk about today is our vaccine clinic. We've got here Toyin, who leads the vaccine clinic, which is one of the most delightful places I've been during all the epidemic. And here she is with our story.
Good evening, everyone. of the COVID vaccination clinic started in November. We started looking at where we would set up, what it would look like, the kind of staff that we would need to recruit to help us work in the clinic. If you look at the picture there, it looks really nice and well set up. I can assure you, when we started in December, it didn't look a thing like that. We had some really rickety boards that we were tripping over, but we've then progressed to what you see there. It was also difficult finding a location because obviously some services were still up and running in the hospital at the time, some were scaled back, and it was kind of a bit like having some detective work, looking around, seeing where the location could be. And we ended up in the cardiac gym, which was, when we started, we had a smaller space. We've now progressed into a bigger space. And that first day in December, when the first person actually got vaccinated, it was just an amazing feeling. We had cameras there, which were also quite nice. So we appeared on TV. And I think the first person that got vaccinated was an older person, but she was somebody who worked in a care home. And it was just amazing. I think there were tears in most of our eyes. We had lots of people around us at the time. We had lots of senior staff, lots of people that we would on a normal basis never work together. So it brought a lot of teams together from different areas of the hospital, which was also very nice. I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of wonderful people that I would never have met if not because of this vaccination clinic. And, you know, I think what I love the most when I think back now is when the elderly were being vaccinated, because they came to us with like boxes of chocolate and biscuits because they were just happy to be out of the house. You know, they'd been stuck inside and they could see that this was light for them. And that's how I describe it. Like the vaccine rollout was like light at the end of the tunnel. You know, you could see that we'd been in this dark cloud, but now all of a sudden there was this light and we were going towards it, and that was what the vaccine brought for us. But I think also it was just nice, like I said, you know, the teamwork, working together with different individuals. I've made lots of friends now. I've got lots of consultants that I can kind of say, oh, if I need a favor, maybe I can call them. But jokes apart, it's been really nice, and we've felt supported all the way along from the senior team, you know, from the chief exec down to even the lowest person, I would say. You know, we've all just come together and it's just been an amazing experience. It's been really, really wonderful. I can't actually express it in words, but it's just been really good. So I know that COVID has been a terrible thing, but it's also brought some good. It's brought some people together that maybe if there wasn't COVID would never have come together as they have done. And the clinic goes on, and obviously now we've vaccinated probably close to 80,000, which is amazing because I look back and think, wow, is that really what we've done? We've had plenty of support from pharmacists as well and admin team. So it's not just been nursing and medical. It's been a combination of all different teams that have brought this together, and we've worked well together. And now the next step, boosters and third doses. So the show goes on. Thank you very much for allowing me to talk to you this evening.
Thank you, Toyin. I have to say, I think when Toyin says light at the end of the tunnel, that is exactly how it feels when you go into the vaccine clinic. There's a lot of joy, lots of people who want to go and work there and do some shifts there because of the joy at giving the vaccine and how that makes people feel. So I just want to talk a little bit more about our experience of COVID-19 and what we actually did. Our organisation has 66 adult ITU beds, and during the peak of COVID, we doubled that more or less to 132. That pulled on a lot of staff and resources in order to do that. We have, as Toyin has described, set up the staff and vaccine clinic, and we have to this date undertaken 81,000 vaccines of both staff and our local population. Given where we have been with the elective surgery, where some non-urgent elective surgery had to be cancelled, we've had a laser focus in regards to making sure that those patients waiting a long period of time are getting treated. And it's been a thrill for me to see consultants, nurses, our theatre nurses across both St George's and our sector, South West London, to work together, focusing on how we can get patients treated. Since the epidemic started, we've had 3,000 patients that we have discharged from our organisation. In order to keep our operations going, we've also invested 13 million to build a new surgical unit on the Queen Mary site. And we've also been focused on ensuring that our staff and patients remain safe. We continue to this day about hands, face safe. And you see here one of the campaigns we ran about making sure that everybody continues to wear a face mask. We've also been absolutely clear about supporting and recognising our staff. Through this National Staff Survey, we looked at the areas that our staff asked us to look at and pointed out we weren't doing as well in, and we created the Big Five, where over the last 5 months we've looked at such things every month around staff health and wellbeing, staff development, freedom to speak up, areas where we know we need to make improvements, and we have. We've gone through the organisation in order to do that. We've implemented some health and wellbeing hubs, which our staff can enjoy to have some downtimes during very busy days. Our COVID-19 vaccination campaigns have also used our staff in order to reach hard-to-reach groups for vaccinations. Our staff networks have been set up and have been going great guns in terms of looking at those staff from diverse backgrounds and supporting them through the pandemic and through their roles at work. We've also invested in staff support and counselling services, which have been well used during the last 18 months, including our counsellors going out on wards and departments, talking with staff, sitting in the coffee rooms, just making sure that they're available for staff to talk to. But most of all, we've also had a huge amount of support from our communities, and for that I say thank you so much. It's been spectacular. Thank you. But we've also looked at and managed to continue to develop improvements for patients, the reason why we are here. We've spent over 5 million refurbishing our A&E department to make it safer for patients to come and be treated. We've moved to 45% of our outpatient appointments being virtual. We've reorganised our primary care hub to look after urgent patients over at Queen Mary's Hospital. We've developed from February last year our Children and Young People's Council, and having been interviewed with them, they'd make a great job at News at 10 in terms of asking me really difficult questions about looking after children in our organisation. They're absolutely phenomenal in making sure we continue to focus on the young people that we have and that we care for. We've also been awarded a Twins Trust Centre of Excellence, where we've been recognised for the outstanding care we give parents who have multiple births. And lastly, we have a new interventional radiology unit where we can continue to look after patients undertaking minimal invasive surgery for the benefit of patients in our care. We've got clearly plans looking forward to the future, working for greater collaboration with our integrated care system across South West London. We have a new group model with Epsom and St Helier to provide more opportunity to develop joint clinical teams and joint services, and a shared chief executive and myself and leadership team, whilst maintaining 2 independent boards. We also have an opportunity to start modernising our estate. Our new estate strategy will help us create an efficient, sustainable and flexible estate to meet the needs of St George's and the patients for which we care for. We've already demolished many of our old disused buildings on the St George's site, which will put us in a much better position to maximise our Tooting site. And our strategy will play an important role in creating state-of-the-art facilities for our patients to improve staff areas. We're also very passionate about having a greener St George's. As part of our Green Plan, we're committed to becoming carbon zero by 2040. We'll be undertaking audits of our green spaces and biodiversity, travel plans, digital infrastructure, as well as the strategies for 2025. We also plan by the end of this year to switch to green energy providers. On top of this, I know our clinicians have been very busy working to ensure that we can reduce the amount of gases that we use for anaesthetics, and also the amount of single-use items that we use. Not only to mention that the amount that we have invested in new cycling facilities and showering facilities to try and encourage our staff to use their bikes rather than their cars. Thank you, Gillian, and thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jacqueline. Now we're going to hear from Tom Shearer, who's our Deputy Chief Finance Officer. Tom's going to give us an overview of the financial position of the Trust. Tom.
Thank you, Chairman. So my name's Tom Shearer. I'm the Deputy Chief Finance Officer here at St George's. I'm going to start by giving you an overview of the audit of our annual accounts for 2021, which was undertaken by Grant Thornton, which for the second year in a row was completed largely remotely, which brings with it an awful lot of challenges, but has also allowed us to prove the benefits of remote working and that things don't need to suffer when working largely from home. The good news is that we had an unqualified audit opinion and there were no significant matters arising from the audit. This year we also undertook a more extensive value for money audit with no key recommendations made as part of that review as well. And during the year the Trust was removed from financial special measures with NHS improvement, which was also fantastic news. In terms of the impact of COVID-19 on the financial position, it's obviously been a very uncertain time financially for the organisation as well. Planning was suspended prior to 2021 during the first wave of the pandemic, and the Trust was funded at cost, essentially, during the first half of the financial year, or justifiable cost. And the Trust was able to justify all of its expense and therefore achieved funding to match that expenditure in the first half of the year. We saw a changing of the financial framework in the second half of the year, when the Trust moved to largely block funding for NHS services, so a fixed income with variable elements for items such as testing, vaccinations and PPE being supplied centrally. In terms of cash, the Trust was in receipt of a month's block income in advance, so the Trust completed the whole year with a healthy cash balance, which ensured that decisions weren't delayed by access to cash, which was good news. And finally, in terms of capital, the Trust was in receipt of additional funding to fund all additional capital expenditure that was required in response to the pandemic. In terms of some of the key elements of our financial performance, we were able to achieve a small surplus of 1.3 million during the financial year, a year in which we saw significantly increased costs, and our costs went from 920 million to just over £1 billion, so about an 11% increase, which was largely due to inflation in part, but of course the response to the pandemic, where an awful lot of resource was directed towards care of the patients within the Trust. As I mentioned previously, the changing of the financial regime meant that we were funded at that cost for the first half of the year, and for the second half of the year we were able to remain within the financial limits that had been set for the Trust, hence being able to achieve the 1.3 million surplus. We were also able to spend almost 99 million on capital, which was fantastic news, which we were able to invest in estate, IT and medical equipment backlog, as well as some investments such as the Queen Mary's, or the additional theatres at Queen Mary's Hospital in Roehampton that was mentioned earlier. Coming on to the current financial year, we obviously entered the financial year with continued uncertainty. We are under new financial planning rules again, so we have a continuation of block funding for the first half of the financial year, and we're still awaiting final guidance for the second half of the financial year, although we expect some form of block to continue as well. We have received funding for elective recovery, and for any additional activity that we're able to complete, we receive funding for that. We've also continued to receive funding to address additional costs as part of the pandemic as well. Whilst we're expecting a more challenging position in the second half of the year, we expect funding largely to continue for these areas, whilst we are preparing for some form of efficiency to return to the NHS, which the Trust is in the process of working through the detail of currently. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Now I'm pleased to introduce the Trust's lead governor, Richard Mycroft.
Thank you, Gillian.
who's going to talk about our Council of Governors and the Trust members. Richard.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Richard Mycroft. I'm the lead governor here at the Trust, and representing the interests of members like you and the interests of the public generally is one of our main responsibilities as governors. And at a local level, the support of members has been particularly important during this difficult year. Next slide, please. Governors are a group of volunteers from different backgrounds whose main role is to consider carefully the performance of the board and hold the non-executive directors to account for that performance. And that's a responsibility set out in law. There are 26 of us, and you can see those on screen. The largest group are public governors elected by public members, like many of you. We have staff governors who are represented by staff at the hospital, and we have appointed governors appointed by local bodies such as councils, universities and Health Watch. We meet as a Council of Governors around 5 times a year, chaired by the Trust Chair, to discuss the work of the Trust and to discuss future plans with members of the board as well, raising questions on your behalf. We also observe board committees and the board itself, because it's important that we understand new developments and the way services are being operated so that we can represent your interests. Over the past year, of course, all of that's been done online. Next slide, please. This year, governors have had to replace the face-to-face contact, which has always been so important to governors to get your views, by online or written content. But we still carry out many of the same activities. Our constituency events, which used to be held in local libraries so local people could get to those quite easily, have had to be held online. And that's the same for our popular health talks. We highlight information on different governors each week so that you can get to know them each month, in the Trust newsletter, The Brief. We can't hold out normal Meet the Governor sessions, which we have on the hospital sites, but we can still hear members' views and follow up issues raised by members and the public. And we've introduced governor profiles on the website so that you can get to know your governors. Next slide, please. You can make contact with governors using some of the ways shown on the screen now, if you look at those carefully. You can become a member of the hospital, which is easy to do, it's free and simple, and shows your support for the hospital. Or you can request a copy of the brief, which is shown here. Finally, I'd like to say that as a London teaching hospital, delivering a complex set of services to patients, St George's has always had to face more pressures than most. But this year's been tremendous, and I've got so much admiration for the staff of the Trust, their skill, their flexibility and their dedication, together with the sound leadership of the Trust itself. The way the Trust has worked with other local partners has been amazing. Over the next year, the governors, meeting as the Council, will look carefully at the changes which are impacting on the NHS and which will affect the way St George's operates. And we'll continue to question and challenge on your behalf. But mostly, we hope to work constructively with the Trust Board so that they can deliver the very best service possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard, for that. Now we're moving on to the question and answer, because our presentations are finished. And if the people on the panel already aren't able to answer a question, we will be supported by somebody at the end who will probably change according to the question. So there'll be a little bit of movement, so bear with us if you can. And one of my colleagues is going to read out the questions. We're going to start with the ones that have already been submitted. And then I'll either field the question myself, probably not very many, or field it to the appropriate colleague. And I'll introduce the Chief Officer doing it if it isn't one of the people that have already been introduced to you. So I think, Michael, you're going to start reading out the questions.
Yes, thanks, Gillian. Our first question is around the Green Plan and how do you plan to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2040?
Thank you. Tom, you're going to take that for us.
Thank you. So the Trust's Green Plan is a central and pivotal part of the Trust's estate strategy and is also a big part of a big piece of collaboration with Wandsworth Borough Council as part of the Wandsworth Estate Strategy as well. It's set to be achieved through a variety of targets, and some of which include switching to green energy suppliers, developing a climate change plan, as well as an audit of some of the Trust's green spaces, as well as many of the items that Jacqueline spoke about in her presentation. So it's a central part of that estate strategy, and achieving sustainable development is a key part of what the Trust plans to do.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Michael?
Our next question, Gillian, is you've just announced the formation of a group model with Epsom and St Helier. How will this benefit patients of St George's?
Thank you very much. I think that's probably one for me. As well as being chairman of St George's, I've also been chairman of Epsom St Helier for the last couple of years. The group, of course, as Jacqueline referred to in her presentation, has only very, very recently been brought together with Jacqueline's appointment as Group Chief Executive. But I do want to emphasise that we were already working closely with Epsom and St Helier. Indeed, the relationship between the 4 acute hospitals in London, in southwest London, I think has been astounding. Has really proved its worth during the pandemic. I also want to emphasise that for the vast majority of staff, and certainly for all our patients, nothing is outwardly going to change. So I don't want people to feel anxious about whether they will lose out in some way. Our commitment to providing outstanding care to our patients is absolute. And one of the strengths of the relationship with Epsom St Helier actually is they have exactly the same commitment. I think there's one slightly different word between our two vision statements, but actually both trusts are completely committed to providing the very best care to our patients. Behind the scenes, however, this group will enable us to share skills and expertise and resources in a number of areas so that we can ensure that both organisations are better able to take on the challenge of the growing demand on our services. I'm confident that we will be more effective and more efficient, and that will bring benefits to our patients for years to come. Thank you, Michael.
The next question is on virtual outpatients. Are there any plans to survey patients on their experiences and views? Would it be possible to ask patients if they prefer virtual or in-person appointments?
Thank you, Michael. And as if by magic, Rob Bleasdale, who is our chief nurse, has managed to get himself to the table and is ready to answer that question. Rob.
Thank you, Chairman. So in response to the pandemic, we had to respond very quickly in thinking the way we delivered our services. And one of those was to move our outpatient appointments to different virtual platforms through telephone appointments or through video applications. Largely that has been very well received, both by our clinicians, but also more importantly, our patients. And we have surveyed them throughout the pandemic to adapt and change the way in which we deliver those outpatient appointments. As we return our services to normal, we are moving to a hybrid model. So if our patients need to see a clinician face-to-face, because there are many things that we can't do virtually, they will receive a face-to-face appointment. And we are prioritising that in the first instance, that patients who clinically need to see clinicians face-to-face will get a face-to-face appointment. And those whose preferences are face-to-face, we will also be offering that. But we continue to keep that under review. And we're pleased that we will continue to offer virtual outpatient appointments.
Michael?
The next question is, given the emerging and disturbing research about extra vulnerability to COVID of people with learning disabilities, what plans does the Trust have for addressing this?
Thank you. So Rob's going to take this one again.
Yeah, thank you. So we're really proud of our learning disability liaison team here at St George's. We have 3 members of staff who work exceptionally hard to provide care for some of the most vulnerable patients navigating complex health systems. And they've worked really flexibly through the pandemic to support patients with learning disabilities be connected to their loved ones whilst we've been able to have visiting on site. And that's through use of social media, navigating our patient information leaflets by putting them in easy read formats, but also helping them get to their appointments and prioritising their appointments first so they're not waiting in a busy, complicated hospital. We continue to review our learning disability service, but I think it's important to note that we have a strong, well-established learning disability team through engagement with our learning disability partners is positively well evaluated, and we benchmark well against other hospitals across England.
Michael?
The next question is, I've been worried about coming to the hospital during the pandemic. Is it safe?
Rob?
Thank you. So I understand the general public's concern about visiting hospitals, especially as the numbers of COVID cases rose through the pandemic. Our teams, and specifically our infection control team, have worked very hard to be responsive to the increasing numbers of COVID, and we're pleased that we've put a number of measures in place to limit the risk of infection and the spread of COVID. A number of those measures we expect the public to do anyway, such as wearing face masks. You will see our staff and our patients in the hospital continuing to wear face masks. There is increasing numbers of hand gel available throughout the hospital, and we encourage our members of the public and our patients to regularly perform good hand hygiene as well as our staff. Just as we advise you to do hands, face and space in the community, the same applies in hospital. But additionally, we have enhanced cleaning in place, very frequent testing of patients at the day of admission, day 3 and day 7, to identify any patients that may have COVID and isolate them appropriately, as well as regular staff testing as well, and also the vaccination programme. If patients and the members of the public need to access our health service, though, I would like to reassure them that we are open for business and they should continue to access their local health services.
Thank you, Rob.
The next question we've had via the chat. As a resident of Lambeth, I was surprised to find out that St George's Physio Department was only looking after Wandsworth residents. Why is this the case?
Rob, are you able to take that one?
I'm happy to answer that, Julie.
Thank you.
Thank you for raising that concern. As far as I'm aware, our physio department do care for patients across Wandsworth and Merton, as well as our local boroughs. They are triaged appropriately, so without getting into individual circumstances that you've raised, and I'm happy if you want to email the organisation and we could look at that individual case. Our patients are triaged based on their clinical need and prioritisation, and we do receive referrals from other boroughs as well.
Our next question, also on the chat, was in the past monthly board meetings, they were held in public. Might there be an opportunity for members to attend online?
I think that's probably one for me, isn't it? I absolutely understand the question and wish we had better technology to enable more participation. We have tried some means of improving the situation, but I recognise it's probably not gone as far as members would like. But we are committed, given that it does seem that this is going on for a period of time now. We won't be able to meet in public, I fear, for some time to go. So we will be looking to further the involvement of members and allow more active participation. And again, I very much regret having to do these things electronically as we do. It's hard for all of us, I think. I recognise that members and other interested members of the public can't see us in the same way, and equally we can't see you. And our governors as well find it really difficult. So I think we're all committed to making the technology work in the best possible way that we can. And I absolutely acknowledge that it's not as good yet as we would like it to be. But please accept my commitment to make as much progress on that as fast as we can. Thank you.
Next question is, can we now visit our loved ones in hospital?
I can answer that one, Julian, thank you. At the height of the pandemic, we did restrict our visiting in line with many other hospitals, and that was to protect our public as well as some of the most vulnerable patients. That wasn't a decision we took lightly. We know you want to visit your loved ones and your relatives while they're in hospital. And it was a difficult decision we made, but we supported that through messaging services, video messaging and dedicated family liaison services. I'm really pleased to say that we have restarted visiting within St George's, although there are still some restrictions in place, and that's to protect our most vulnerable of patients. And for further details around the visiting arrangements and which restrictions are in place, you can find them on our website under visiting. And please do look at it, and we do encourage you to keep in contact with your loved ones in the hospital. It is important to them.
Our next question is, will I be able to have my flu jab and a COVID booster at the same time?
This is another one for Rob.
Yeah, thank you. So COVID boosters and flu, really two very important subjects, and one that I'm sure I will be talking about lots over the next coming months. I think it's important, first of all, to reassure you that the COVID and flu vaccinations are two separate vaccines. So it is not a combined vaccine, they are two separate vaccines. And therefore we're working really quickly to start the COVID booster programme, as well as deliver our successful flu vaccination programme again this year. And we'll be starting that from next week. We will be offering COVID and flu vaccination at the same time. But that's only to eligible staff and members of the public. You will be able to book your appointment for your COVID booster through the national booking system if you are an eligible member of the public or staff. And there is no obligation for you to receive your COVID and flu vaccination at the same time. That is a personal choice, and we'll help counsel you around that. What I would say is your COVID booster vaccination can only be given at the earliest 6 months after your second jab. With that in mind, I would urge the public and our staff not to delay getting their flu vaccination if you can have your flu vaccine before it is time to have your COVID booster. It's really important you continue to protect yourself, the NHS and your loved ones by being vaccinated for both flu as well as COVID.
Thank you, Rob. I think that's really clear and really important. Michael?
What is the justification for the 80 million spend on a new renal unit on the St George's site when renal services also appear to be part of the plan for the new hospital in Sutton?
Thank you, Michael. Jacqueline, you're going to answer that.
Yes, thank you very much for that question. The proposal will see the St George's and Epsom St Helier renal services brought together in a new specialist centre here at St George's, rather than having two inpatient kidney care, specialist inpatient kidney care units at two southwest hospitals. Bringing the two services together will absolutely lead to a range of benefits for patients, including an opportunity to really look at the research into kidney care, as well as a more efficient, effective service. I'm really delighted to say that both the Kidney Patient Association and our renal clinicians across both organisations are hugely supportive of this move to bring services together.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Michael?
Our next question, staff have had a tough year. How are we planning to support them?
Thank you. And could I introduce Paul de Gama, who is our Chief People Officer. And Paul, you're going to take that question for us.
Thank you very much, Chair. Staff have definitely had a very, very tough year, and I was just thinking when we heard our patient story earlier, trying to think of one word to describe them is not easy. Brilliant, amazing, so many other words we could use. Some of the things that we've done to support our staff was during the pandemic, we risk assessed all of our staff to make sure we made their working environment as safe as possible. What we've also done is introduced one-to-one health and wellbeing conversations so that staff have an opportunity to raise concerns and issues they may have with their line managers. Having good line management is fundamental to health and wellbeing. I'm really proud of the staff support team that we have here. Jacqueline already mentioned the team and some of the work that they do. It's a really, really strong team, and what's really special about them is it's not a reactive service. They will go out proactively to our different clinical areas and engage with our staff and offer support as required. We offer a range of mental health wellbeing, such as counselling, such as support groups. We also offer a range of online support functions as well. It's really important that our staff have adequate rest, and so we've made a real point of ensuring that our staff take their annual leave and have good rest. And so, for example, when we moved staff from their original work areas back to where they were working during the pandemic, actually we made sure that they had a period of rest before they returned back to their original work areas. Jacqueline's also already mentioned the Big Five, and that's a real response back to our staff in terms of what they told us about during our staff survey. And we really tried to focus upon what are some of those things that really get in the way. And I think we've done some good things there. Probably a thing in terms of going back to the original point I made, which is it's really, really important that you have good leadership. And so fundamental to our approach to looking after our staff is the work that we've done around culture and leadership development. And I think that's really important. And then the final thing we're doing at the moment is we're looking at how we can tangibly thank our staff. And we're working on various plans this autumn to say a massive thank you to them because they've been brilliant.
Thank you, Paul.
Our next question is, what is the Trust doing to tackle racism?
I think that's another one for Paul, if you don't mind, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah, again, going back to the culture change programme that we've put in to place, it's absolutely fundamental to that work. There's a whole range of things that we're doing which I could talk about. If I just give some examples of that work. So, for example, with recruitment, we've introduced recruitment inclusion specialists, which we asked to sit on all recruitment panels for more senior roles. We're also looking at introducing a new process where our internal colleagues who may be from minority backgrounds who aren't appointed, giving them more formal feedback and actually creating a process so that we really understand why they didn't get the roles. We've done things that, say, for example, like looking at our disciplinary processes and making sure that our processes are fair. So whereas previously somebody might enter into a disciplinary process, we've introduced a new panel which will look at every single case and try to understand, is that the right thing to do? And I'm really pleased to see that there's been a reduction in the number of our staff from BAME backgrounds entering into our disciplinary processes as well. We have various our network groups. We've got a really active network group, a BAME network group, which myself, Jacqueline, Gillian attend as well, and we really are supporting that group as much as we can. And as I say, absolutely fundamental to our culture change programme. I'm pleased looking at what we call our race equality figures, that there are 9 measurements in those figures that we look at. And out of those 9, we've seen an improvement in 6. We've seen one of those remain the same and 2 of them go backwards, which is disappointing. But I'm pleased by the fact that we can look at it and we can say that 6 out of 9 have improved. It's going to take time, but I think we've got some really good plans in place.
Could I just add to that, if I may? This is something that the board takes incredibly seriously. And just over a year ago, Jacqueline and I challenged ourselves and the board and then the organisation to really tackle this with vigour. And we have made progress for sure, and Paul's outlined that. But it's something that we never lose focus on, because we need to make more progress more quickly. And whilst we're encouraged by what's happened and what's been described, I think the whole board wants to see more rapid progress, because it's quite clear that this is something that the NHS as a whole, and we are part of that, needs to tackle really vigorously in order that all our staff have the best possible experience coming to work. Thanks. Sorry, I just wanted to add that, Paul.
Thank you.
Michael.
Our next question is, what impact will the changes to integrated care systems have on St George's?
Thank you. I'm going to ask the Chief Executive to answer that one. Jacqueline.
Thank you very much. So I think in South West London we've been really lucky in terms of how we've been working over the last few years anyway with our ICS. We are very collaborative. We are very open together about the next steps and what we do. We have already had an acute provider collaborative in South West London for at least the 5 or 6 years, which has given us a head start about how we work together in a very different way. We're very comfortable with collaboration, which is what we're being asked to do, and have already collaborated hugely over the last 18 months in the face of the pandemic for the benefit of patients and the development of staff. So far, we see nothing but positive things with the ICS, but we know we've still got a way to go. There's quite a lot of structures that need to be put in place, as well as new ways of working, which we are going to have to work together in order to implement. Thank you.
Our next question is, there's been a lot of talk over the past week about winter planning and the pressures on hospitals. What can the public do to help?
Thank you. Jacqueline.
Thank you very much. So what was the last bit of that question? What can the
public do to help?
What can public do to help? So there has been a lot of pressure in the emergency care pathway, and we are also, I think, going to have a difficult winter. I think the biggest thing to start with is to see what other help you can elicit initially. So use your pharmacist or 111, NHS 111, to see whether there are other things that you can do to help. But I would also say, please don't worry if you need to come into hospital. We'd much rather you come in earlier to see us if you are unwell than actually to wait to be seen. There's a lot more we can do in terms of different places you can be seen by a medical specialist, whether it be a clinical nurse specialist, emergency practitioner, general practitioner, or a doctor in A&E. But we want to make sure that you are aware about where you can go to receive help. But please, please, if you're really poorly, please come in. The longer you wait, the more difficult it will be. So we want to see you if you need our help.
Thank you. Michael?
You spoke last year about the Lewis report on cardiac surgery. What improvements have you made to the service, and is the unit safe?
Thank you very much indeed. And we're joined now by Richard Jennings, who's our Chief Medical Officer. Richard, this one's for you.
Thank you. So, yes, the Lewis report has been extremely helpful. The cardiac surgery unit is most certainly safe now. The outcomes of the country's cardiac surgery units are collected and compared by an organisation called NICOR, the National Institute for Clinical Outcomes Research, Cardiovascular Outcomes Research. And NICOR has confirmed to us since 2018 that our outcomes for cardiac surgery are, as they put it, out of alert. We're the same as other cardiac surgery units in the country in terms of the quality of our outcomes. So patients can come and have cardiac surgery with confidence at St George's, knowing that the service is safe. We've made a lot of improvements on the back of the Lewis report recommendations, of which there were many, and many of them we'd acted on before the Lewis report was published in March last year. And if I was picking out some of the things which I think are most important, I'd highlight the fact that no patient now gets a planned cardiac operation unless their case has been discussed in a multidisciplinary team meeting where we have representation not just from cardiac surgery but also from the cardiologists and the anaesthetists and other specialists who might be involved in the patient's care, so that the care is really well planned and really well considered by a collection of clinicians who come to a consensus on the best approach that suits the patient and that the patient's happy with. And that's a really important step forward for making sure that our services are as good as they possibly can be. We've also got still the leadership of Mr. Steve Livesey, who is a very senior and experienced cardiac surgeon from outside the organisation, who we brought in to lead the unit, and he's still with us and still leading, and that's working very well, and he's been made very welcome in the unit, I'm pleased to say, and is with us. And also, I would say that we've had a transformation in the way that the unit deals with its own safety governance. So everybody who works in the cardiac surgery unit looks very carefully at the complications that our patients may suffer, because none of these operations are free from the risk of complications, and looks very carefully at anything which may happen that wasn't part of the plan, so that we can learn from all those things, but also make sure that we're tracking our complication rates as well as our overall outcomes to make sure that they remain within the safe range, which they do.
Thank you, Richard. Michael.
The next question we received in the chat, given the understandable focus on COVID and the need for everyone to multitask and help out, are new clinicians being adequately trained in their intended areas or specialties?
Thank you. Richard, would you take that one? Thanks.
It's been a really tough time for our new clinicians. And as medical director, I think particularly about our junior doctors, but of course they're not our only clinicians. There are our nurses, our allied health professionals. Everybody was stretched in wave 1 and wave 2 of COVID. And it's certainly the case that COVID, when it began, was a major interruption to the normal life and the normal training of our new and, in general, young doctors and other clinicians. I'm very pleased to say that we've been able to come back to normal training, and I can confirm that our doctors are indeed having their training on their training programs in a way which COVID does not now interrupt. And of course, although we wouldn't have wished it this way, I think this new generation of doctors and clinicians have learnt something that I never learnt when I was training in the United Kingdom about how flexible the National Health Service can be, how quickly we can adapt to new illnesses, new treatments, how we can respond under stress, how we can work better in unusual ways. So although we wouldn't have asked for this, COVID has given our next generation of clinicians a really robust, if somewhat baptism by fire, opening to their career in terms of what they can cope with and what they've learned.
Thank you, Richard. I think those points are so well made. Michael?
Are we through the third wave?
I think that's one for you again.
No, we're not. We're absolutely not through the third wave. What's very good is that the third wave looks very different to the first wave and the second wave. So the first wave and the second wave, I think it's fair to say, were devastating. I think we all know that. We all followed that on the news. We saw it in the newspapers. We had our own personal stories and experiences. What's made a huge difference is COVID vaccination. So COVID vaccination has largely but not completely broken the link between COVID infection and COVID hospitalization and COVID death. Not completely broken the link, but largely broken the link. What we're seeing now is that we're getting a steady rate of hospital admissions. It is nothing like the rate that we were seeing in wave 2. It was initially predominantly young people. The proportion of hospital admissions now who are older is gradually rising, and that's important because older people are not as likely as young people to quickly recover from COVID. We are still seeing nationally, sadly, deaths from COVID in significant numbers. And at the moment, the pattern that we're seeing is that, at least in our area of southwest London, something like 2/3 to 3/4 of our patients who are coming in with symptomatic COVID as the reason for admission are people who haven't been fully vaccinated or haven't been vaccinated at all. And so there are some morals to this. And one of the main morals is for us all to recognise that COVID is not about to go away, and that we all have to behave in a responsible way to make sure that we're not inviting COVID infection and we're not behaving in a way that we know may put us at risk of catching COVID when we don't need to. So all the messages that we've had nationally about face masks on tubes, about not gathering unnecessarily in enclosed spaces if we know that we're vulnerable to COVID or if we're not protected from COVID, those messages all remain extremely important. Probably the most important thing is that those of us who haven't been fully COVID vaccinated should be. And it's very important to be respectful of the fact that a lot of people have got concerns and anxieties about COVID vaccination. We need to engage with that in a way which is respectful and not paternalistic. We need to make sure that people have all their questions answered if they have questions about the COVID vaccine. But the fact is that people who are not protected by the vaccine are as vulnerable as they would have been in wave 1 and wave 2. And that means, particularly for older people, if they haven't been vaccinated against COVID, they can still catch COVID and die. And very sadly, I think very tragically, some people are still catching COVID and dying. And we are seeing that. And the other thing which I think is important to recognise is that certainly in our local area, and I think this is replicated nationally, the chances of being admitted with COVID and getting sick enough to be hospitalised with COVID, are greater if we're non-white than if we're white. And that was an inequality that we saw in wave 1 and wave 2. I think we all know from the media and the pictures of people who died of COVID, particularly the pictures that we saw of the NHS staff who died of COVID. What a large proportion of those deaths, tragically, were non-white people. And we're still seeing a trend where we're more likely to be admitted if we're not white. And what we can do about that is promote vaccine acceptance and vaccination in all our communities, because an awful lot of the hospitalisations and indeed nationally the deaths that we're seeing are preventable if we can help people to get the information that they feel they need to overcome any misgivings that they might have about vaccination, so that we don't see avoidable tragedies where families are losing loved ones because people haven't been vaccinated.
Thank you, Richard. I think it's not only, though, hospitalisations, is it? Long COVID as well.
Indeed.
Has caused a considerable grief to families, and might it be worth just mentioning our long COVID service, because it's always easy to talk about the hospitalisation end of it, but we've seen some people who are really continuing to suffer with long COVID, and all the points you've made about vaccination are relevant there.
I think that's a very helpful and important point to make. So St George's has a long COVID service for people who have suffered long-term disability, which comes in many shapes and forms, having had COVID infection. And I think one of the important things to emphasise here is that quite a lot of patients with long COVID are not the older, vulnerable people that I've been talking about when I've talked about hospitalisation and death. They're young people who are previously fit, well and active, with a lot of ambitions in life and a lot of plans in life. And sometimes those ambitions and those plans have been seriously truncated by long-term fatigue or other types of disability caused by COVID infection. So we've seen it as a major priority to set up a really high-quality long COVID service where patients can have access to whatever kind of expert advice they need. And sometimes that's highly technical and specialised to do with different organs in the body. Sometimes it's more general, more holistic, more to do with lifestyle, psychological, mental health and well-being and support. So we have long COVID service, which I think is very well constructed to be holistic and meet whatever the needs of the patient are.
Thank you, Richard. Michael.
This is our final question for the evening, Gillian, and it is the COVID-19 booster safe?
Well, I think the whole point about most of us is we're great fans of vaccination, but I'm going to leave it to a medically qualified person rather than an unqualified fan of vaccination. Richard.
We had very persuasive evidence very early on that COVID vaccination was safe. I think it's worth recognising that the vaccine was rolled out at unprecedented speed and on an unprecedented scale. We've never on the planet responded to an infectious disease so quickly, so innovatively, on such a huge scale. And one of the things that that's shown us is how many people we've vaccinated and how very few people, as a proportion, have suffered serious vaccination side effects. And the risks of vaccination are absolutely minimal compared to the risks of COVID. And in short, vaccination boosters for COVID most certainly are safe. And it's not unusual for a vaccination to need boosting. And those of us who've been vaccinated for other diseases are probably quite familiar with the concept of boosting. Boosting is not a time-critical thing in the same way as a first COVID vaccine was time-critical. When the vaccine first came out, the faster we were vaccinated, the sooner we were protected. But now, what we need is to make sure that after 6 months of our second dose of COVID vaccine, we have a booster dose, and we can afford to do that in a structured and careful way, starting with those who need it most, and then rolling that out to those who are not as vulnerable as the people that we start with. But in short, yes, COVID boosters are certainly safe. I certainly plan to have mine as soon as it's offered to me.
Thank you, Richard. Me too. And everybody else sitting up here. So I believe, Michael, that's the end of our questions. Yeah, I'm getting lots of nods. So it's time then to close the meeting, but I would like to thank everybody for coming. I hope it's been interesting and informative for you. Thank you so much for the questions. I hope as well that the answers, though some of them have necessarily been brief, I suppose, have given you the information that you needed. And again, I think I just want to close the meeting by thanking all my colleagues who've helped make this meeting happen. They don't just happen by accident, and especially in the virtual world, you have to make so many plans so that for you, the people listening, it's seamless. I hope it's been relatively seamless for you. I can't tell from where I am. But I wanted to thank all the amazing staff again of the trust. Richard made the point, but I think we all believe we're just so proud of how staff have risen to the challenge in the most extraordinarily difficult circumstances. And we've spoken already about the support of the community. And I'd like to thank my board colleagues as well. It's been difficult for us as well, not nearly as bad as for a lot of our staff. But I'm grateful for the way that the board has continued to pull together and I hope provide the leadership that we needed. And also to our Council of Governors, and Richard, perhaps the lead governor in particular, who I know are always there for the trust. They do challenge us, and rightly so, that's their job. But they do it because they believe in St George's and they want to see us being the very best we can be. So I think that's it from us. Thank you all very much indeed, and good night.